The sledgehammer connected with rotted wood, sending splinters flying as Calum Ashworth broke through the barn wall that had been sealed for 47 years. The impact jarred his shoulders, but what stopped him cold wasn't the resistance of ancient planks. It was the gasp that echoed from inside the darkness. A woman's gasp. His heart hammered against his ribs as he peered through the jagged hole he'd created. Golden afternoon light streamed past him, illuminating a figure pressed against the far wall of what should have been an empty storage room. She was beautiful in a way that seemed to belong to another century. Auburn hair cascading over a cream-colored dress that looked like it had stepped out of a daguerreotype. "Don't come any closer," she whispered, her voice carrying an accent he couldn't place, something between southern drawl and Irish lilt. Calum dropped the sledgehammer, his mouth dry. He'd bought this barn at the county auction for 50 cents because no one else would bid. The locals had warned him away with superstitious muttering about things best left alone and the Grimsby curse. But he'd dismissed their talk as small-town nonsense. Now, staring at this impossible woman, he wondered if he'd been a fool. "How long have you been in there?" He managed, his voice hoarse with shock. She studied him with eyes the color of storm clouds, taking in his work clothes, his sun-weathered face, the calluses on his hands. "What year is it?" The question hit him like a physical blow. 1893, something. Flickered across her features, relief mixed with desperation. "Then I've been here since the spring of 1846. Calum's rational mind reeled. 47 years. It was impossible. She couldn't be more than 25, with skin smooth as porcelain and not a grey hair on her head. Yet the way she spoke, the bone-deep weariness in her posture, suggested someone who had lived through decades of solitude. "That's impossible," he breathed. "Is it?" She stepped forward, and he noticed she cast no shadow despite the bright light streaming through the opening. He'd made, "Touch me. Go ahead. Touch my hand." Against every instinct screaming at him to run, Calum reached through the hole in the wall. His fingers passed through hers like she was made of mist, yet he swore he felt the phantom of warmth, the ghost of skin against skin. She smiled sadly. "My name is Cordelia Grimsby, and you, dear man, have just broken the seal that has kept me trapped between life and death for half a century." The barn suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. Calum's breath misted in the air as he stared at this beautiful, impossible woman who claimed to be dead. In the distance, he could hear the church bells of Millbrook Creek ringing the hour, a sound that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat since he'd arrived in this sleepy Colorado town 3 months ago. "What happened to you?" he whispered. Cordelia's eyes filled with unshed tears. "I fell in love with the wrong man, and now I'm cursed to remain here until someone can love me enough to set me free, knowing full well that I can never truly touch them, never give them the love they deserve in return." Calum felt something shift inside his chest, a pull he'd never experienced before. "How do you know I'm not that someone?" Cordelia laughed, but there was no humor in it, only the hollow sound of hope that had died and been reborn too many times. "Because you're the 7th man to find me, Calum Ashworth. And the others all ran when they learned the price of loving a ghost. You know my name." It wasn't a question. "I know many things about you. I've been watching through the cracks in these walls since you arrived in Millbrook Creek. I know you came here running from something in Denver. I know you wake up screaming some nights calling out a woman's name, Isabel." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Calum staggered backward, his face draining of color. Don't say her name. She died, didn't she? That's why you're here, buying falling down barns and working yourself to exhaustion. You're trying to outrun the guilt. Stop. His voice cracked like a whip, but Cordelia continued relentlessly. You think if you work hard enough, hurt yourself enough, maybe the pain will stop. But it won't, Calum. It never does. Trust me, I've had 47 years to learn that lesson. He wanted to leave, to walk away from this beautiful ghost, and her terrible truths. But something kept his feet planted on the barn floor. Maybe it was the recognition in her storm-gray eyes, the understanding of someone who knew what it meant to be haunted by love and loss. "What happened to Isabel?" Cordelia asked, her voice gentler now. Caleb closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in Denver, watching his wife burn with fever while he stood helpless beside their bed. "Consumption. I couldn't save her. The doctors said there was nothing anyone could do, but I should have—" "You should have what?" "Worked miracles. Stopped being human." "I should have been enough." The words tore out of him like a confession. She needed me to be stronger, and I failed her. Cordelia moved closer to the hole in the wall, and though she couldn't touch him, her presence felt like a balm against his raw wounds. "The man who cursed me, Bartholomew Vance, he made me believe the same lie. That love meant being everything to someone, fixing all their pain, carrying all their burdens. But that's not love, Caleb. That's martyrdom." Something in her voice made him open his eyes. She was standing so close now that he could see flecks of gold in her gray irises, could count the freckles scattered across her nose like stars. "Tell me about this curse," he said. Cordelia sank down onto what appeared to be a wooden crate, though Caleb could see right through it. "Bartholomew was a wealthy rancher, owned half the territory, handsome, charming, everything a young woman was supposed to want. But he had a darkness in him, a need to possess completely. When I tried to end our engagement, She shuddered, wrapping ghostly arms around herself. "He said, if he couldn't have me, no one could. He locked me in this room and left me to die. But even death wasn't enough for his revenge. He used some kind of dark magic, brought a witch up from New Mexico. Who bound my spirit to this place?" "The seal," Caleb said, understanding dawning. "The wall I broke through. Every few years, someone finds me. They fall in love with the tragic ghost, the beautiful mystery. But when they learn the truth, that loving me means staying trapped, here with me forever, giving up their life, their future, everything, they leave. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't wish this half-existence on anyone." But even as she said it, Caleb could see the desperate hope flickering in her eyes like candlelight in a drafty room. She wanted to be saved, to be loved enough that someone would choose her despite the cost. "What if there was another way?" he asked. Cordelia shook her head. "I've had 47 years to think about it. The witch who cast the spell is long dead. Bartholomew died 20 years ago, and his death changed nothing. There is no other way. Maybe you just haven't found the right person to love you. And maybe," she said, standing up with sudden fierce energy, "you're the same kind of fool as the others. Tell me, Caleb, are you really prepared to give up everything for a woman you can never touch?" That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in his narrow bed in the boarding house, staring at the ceiling while Cordelia's question echoed in his mind. "Are you really prepared to give up everything for a woman you can never touch?" The rational answer was no. He barely knew her. A few hours of conversation through a hole in a barn wall hardly constituted the foundation for a life-altering decision. Yet something about Cordelia had awakened feelings he'd thought died with Isabel. Not just desire, but recognition. The sense of finding someone who understood his deepest wounds. Before dawn, he was back at the barn. "I didn't think you'd return," Cordelia said when she saw him approaching with a lantern and a crowbar. She was sitting by the hole in the wall, looking more solid somehow in the pre-dawn gloom. "I brought tools," he said, "to make the opening bigger. If we're going to talk, we might as well be comfortable." She watched him work, dismantling more of the rotted wood that had imprisoned her for decades. As the opening widened, he noticed she seemed to grow more substantial, as if breaking down the physical barriers somehow strengthened her connection to the world. "Tell me about the others," he said, as he pried away a stubborn board. "The 6 men Who found you before? Why torture yourself? Because I want to understand what made them leave. Cordelia was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke. The first was Jeremiah Pike in 1851, a traveling preacher. He thought he could exorcise me, save my soul, through prayer. When that failed, he declared me a demon and fled. And the second? Marcus Stone, a banker from Colorado Springs, 1856. He was fascinated by me for 3 weeks, visiting every day, bringing flowers I couldn't smell, food I couldn't eat. He even talked about marriage, about finding a way to make me real again. Then his business partner found out about his obsession and threatened to have him committed. He chose his reputation over love. The crowbar slipped in Calem's hands as anger flared in his chest. Coward. Was he? Or was he wise? Marcus had a future, a life. I was asking him to throw it all away for something impossible. Love isn't supposed to be practical, Calem said, attacking the next board with renewed vigor. The third was different, Cordelia continued. Vicente Morales, a vaquero, 1863. He didn't care about practical things. He said he'd rather spend 1 year truly loving me than a lifetime loving no one. But when he realized what the curse actually meant, that he would become like me, trapped and unable to touch, he broke. Said he couldn't live as half a man. And the others? Thomas Wright in 1869, a Union soldier passing through after the war. He lasted the longest, almost 6 months. Built himself a shack next to the barn, spent every day talking to me. But the loneliness finally drove him mad. I watched him ride away talking to himself, mumbling about invisible women and ghost lovers. She paused, pain flickering across her ethereal features. The fifth was Jonathan Mills in 1878, a widower like you, actually. Lost his wife to influenza. He understood grief, understood the weight of carrying someone's memory. For a while I thought, what happened? He fell in love with a living woman. The school teacher, Miss Rebecca Hart. I watched him torn between duty to me and the possibility of real happiness. In the end, I told him to go. How could I ask him to choose a ghost over the chance at life? Calem set down the crowbar and looked at her directly. You let him go. I loved him enough to let him go. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Just as I loved the sixth man, Dr. Henry Caldwell, enough to send him away when his son became ill and needed him in San Francisco. So you've never actually been abandoned, Calem said slowly, understanding dawning. You've been choosing their happiness over your own freedom. Cordelia flinched as if he'd struck her. I won't trap someone in this half-life just to save myself. Even if they want to be trapped. No one truly wants this, Calem. They think they do, caught up in the romance of loving a ghost, the tragedy and mystery. But the reality, the endless years of being able to see but never touch, to love but never physically connect, it destroys men's souls. What if the love was strong enough to overcome that? There is no love that strong. Calem picked up his lantern and moved closer to the enlarged opening. In the flickering light, Cordelia looked almost real. The way sorrow had etched lines around her eyes, the way hope and despair warred in her expression. Tell me exactly how the curse works, he said. Not the simplified version. I want to know every detail. Cordelia studied his face, searching for something. Why? Because unlike the others, I'm not here to save you out of pity or romance. I'm here because I recognize you. Recognize me. You're me, Cordelia. 47 years ago, trapped in guilt and regret, convinced you don't deserve love because you couldn't save someone you cared about. The curse isn't what's keeping you here. It's your own refusal to forgive yourself. Cordelia recoiled, as if Calem had slapped her. You don't understand, don't I? You said Bartholomew locked you in here to die. But why were you in the barn in the first place? What really happened the day you died? Her ghostly form flickered like a candle flame, In the wind. I can't. Yes, you can. Tell me the truth, Cordelia, all of it. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the gaps in the barn walls. When Cordelia finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I came here to meet someone else. A man named Daniel Webb, a ranch hand who worked for Bartholomew. We were going to run away together. Calum felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. You were cheating on your fiancé. It wasn't like that. The words exploded out of her, filled with 47 years of suppressed anguish. Bartholomew was cruel. He hit me, controlled every aspect of my life, threatened to destroy my family if I didn't marry him. Daniel was kind, gentle. He was the only man who ever looked at me like I was a person instead of a possession. But you feel guilty about it. Of course I feel guilty. Good women don't sneak around behind their fiancés' backs. They don't meet other men in secret barns. They don't... She broke off, wrapping her arms around herself. They don't what, Cordelia? They don't get innocent men killed, she whispered. The barn fell silent, except for the creak of old wood. Calum waited, sensing they were finally approaching the heart of the curse that bound her. Bartholomew followed me that night, she continued. Found Daniel and me together. They fought, and Bartholomew, he killed him. Shot him right where you're standing now. Then he locked me in that room and told me I could rot with my lover's ghost. Where's Daniel now? Gone. He passed on the night he died. I felt his spirit leave, felt the peace that came over him. He wasn't bound by guilt. Like I was, he died knowing he'd tried to save me from a monster, but you blame yourself for his death. How can I not? If I hadn't asked him to meet me, if I hadn't been selfish enough to want love, if you hadn't been human enough to want kindness instead of cruelty, Calum interrupted. Cordelia, you were trying to escape an abusive man. That's not selfishness. That's survival. Tell that to Daniel's mother. Tell that to his sister who never married because she was too busy taking care of their family after he died. Tell that to... Daniel chose to help you, just like the 6 men who found you here chose to love you, and chose to leave when the cost became clear. You keep taking responsibility for other people's choices. Cordelia's form began to solidify as her agitation grew. Calum realized her emotions were directly connected to her ability to affect the physical world. You think I'm a coward, she said. No, I think you're afraid. There's a difference. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you forgive yourself, if you accept that you deserved love and kindness, you might actually have to fight for it. It's easier to stay trapped, punishing yourself, than to risk loving someone who might leave. That's not true, isn't it? Every man who found you, you found a reason to push away. The preacher was too judgmental, the banker too practical, the soldier too broken. Even the widower and the doctor, you convinced yourself you were being noble by letting them go, but really, you were protecting yourself from the possibility of being truly vulnerable. Cordelia's eyes blazed with anger, and several tools on Calum's workbench flew across the barn. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell you the truth? Force you to look at your own part in this prison you've built? This prison was built by Bartholomew Vance. The room was built by Bartholomew. The prison was built by your guilt. Calum stepped closer to the opening, close enough that he could see the rapid rise and fall of her translucent chest. I know because I built the same prison after Isabel died. Convinced myself I didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve love, because I'd failed the one person who mattered most. And what changed your mind? The challenge in her voice was sharp as broken glass. You did. The simple answer seemed to drain the fight out of her. Cordelia sank back onto her invisible crate, suddenly looking fragile as spun glass. I don't understand, she whispered. Yesterday, when you looked at me and saw through all my defenses, all my carefully constructed walls, That was the first time since Isabel died that I felt seen. Not pitied, not avoided, but truly understood. And I realized something. The love I felt for my wife wasn't diminished by her death, and it isn't betrayed by feeling something new for you. But I'm dead, Calum. Even if we found a way to break the curse, I've been gone from the world for 47 years. I don't know how to live in your time, how to be a real woman again. Then we'll figure it out together. And if we can't? If I'm trapped here forever? Calum was quiet for a long moment, considering. Outside, he could hear the sounds of Millbrook Creek waking up. Roosters crowing, dogs barking, the distant whistle of the morning train. Life going on. Indifferent. To the cosmic drama playing out in an old barn. Then I guess we'll be trapped together, he said finally. Because I'd rather spend my life loving someone I can't touch than spend it touching someone I can't love. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt both natural and impossible. Every morning before dawn, Calum would arrive at the barn with coffee and a book, settling beside the opening he'd gradually enlarged until it was wide enough for them to see each other clearly. Every evening after his work was done, he'd taken a job at the general store to support himself. He would return with dinner and stories of the outside world. Cordelia began to change. The desperate edge to her beauty softened into something warmer, more alive. She laughed more often, and when she did, flowers would bloom spontaneously around the barn despite the approaching winter. Her presence affected the physical world in ways that seemed to grow stronger as her connection to life renewed itself. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him one evening as he sat reading to her by lamplight. "About building my own prison." Calum looked up from the book of poetry he'd borrowed from the town librarian. "And I want to try something. But I need you to promise me that if it doesn't work, if something goes wrong, you'll leave. You'll go back to your life and forget about the ghost in the barn. Cordelia, promise me." Her voice carried a note of command he'd never heard before. "I won't be responsible for destroying another man's future." "I promise," he said, though the words tasted like lies. The next morning, Cordelia was waiting for him with a new intensity, as if she'd spent the night gathering courage from some deep well within herself. "The witch who cast the original spell," she began, "left something behind. I never told the others because I was afraid of what might happen if they tried to use it." She pointed to a loose floorboard near where Daniel had died. "Under there's a box." Calum pried up the board and found a small iron box, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move when he looked directly at them. Inside was a piece of parchment covered in spidery handwriting and a small vial of what looked like dried blood. "What does it say?" Cordelia's face was pale but determined. "It's the counterspell. But Calum, the cost, tell me. To break the binding, I have to willingly choose life over death, love over safety. But more than that, I have to trust someone, enough to literally put my soul in their hands. And they have to be willing to risk their own soul to save mine." Calum studied the parchment, though the strange writing seemed to swim before his eyes. "What exactly does that mean?" "The spell requires a willing exchange. For 24 hours, you would take on my curse while I become human again. If at the end of that time, you still choose to save me, if your love is true and strong enough, then we both become free. But if you change your mind, if the reality of being trapped between life and death breaks you like it broke Thomas Wright, then what? Then I die completely, and you remain trapped forever." The barn fell silent except for the sound of Calum's heartbeat thundering in his ears. 24 hours as a ghost, unable to touch the physical world, sustained only by the hope that his love for a woman he'd known less than a month would be enough to save them both. "When?" he asked. "Calum, no. You can't seriously be considering. When? Tonight. The spell has to be cast at midnight during a new moon. And tonight is the last new moon before winter sets in. If we don't try now, we'll have to wait until spring. Then we do it tonight. Cordelia began to pace, her agitation making objects throughout the barn rattle and shake. You're being foolish. You barely know me. How can you risk everything for someone you've spoken to for 3 weeks? How can I not? Cordelia, in 3 weeks, you've given me back something I thought I'd lost. Forever, the ability to hope. To imagine a future that doesn't revolve around guilt and regret. If there's a chance we can be together, really together, I have to take it. And if I'm wrong, if the spell fails or goes wrong somehow, then at least I'll die knowing I tried. To save someone I love instead of failing them. The word hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had dared cross before. Love. He'd said it, and from the way Cordelia's ghostly form flickered and brightened, she felt it too. You love me, she whispered. I love you, even though I'm dead. Even though I can't give you children or grow old with you or… Cordelia. He reached toward her, his hand stopping just short of where her face would be if she were solid. I love you because of who you are, not what you can give me. I love your intelligence, your courage, the way you put everyone else's happiness before your own. I love how you've survived 47 years of loneliness without losing your capacity. For kindness, I love you. Tears streamed down her translucent cheeks, and where they fell, the old wooden floor bloomed with tiny white flowers. I love you too, she whispered. God help me, I love you too. That evening, as the sun set and the new moon rose invisible, in the sky they prepared for the most dangerous gamble of both their lives. Caleb had spent the day putting his affairs in order, writing a letter to his sister in Denver, settling his debts, even penning a note to the town sheriff explaining what he was attempting, just in case something went wrong. Are you ready? Cordelia asked as the church bell began to toll midnight. Caleb took one last look around the physical world, the barn that had become their meeting place, the tools that marked his solid existence, his own hands that could still grasp and build and create. I'm ready, he said. Cordelia began to read from the ancient parchment, her voice growing stronger with each strange syllable. The air in the barn began to shimmer, and Caleb felt a strange pulling sensation, as if something vital was being drawn out of him. The last thing he saw before the world dissolved was Cordelia's face, solid and real and beautiful, reaching toward him with tears of hope streaming down her cheeks. Caleb's first sensation as a ghost was cold, not the external chill of winter wind, but a bone-deep absence of warmth that seemed to emanate from his very soul. His second sensation was the disorienting lightness of existing without weight, without substance, without the constant gravitational pull that had defined every moment of his living existence. His third sensation was wonder. Cordelia stood before him, gloriously, impossibly alive. Her skin had the warm glow of health. Her auburn hair caught the lamplight like spun copper, and when she breathed, he could see the rise and fall of her chest, could hear the sweet sound of air filling her lungs. It worked, she whispered, staring at her own solid hands in amazement. I can feel again. I can… She reached out and grasped the lantern, laughing with delight as her fingers closed around solid metal. I can touch things. Caleb tried to speak and found his voice had the same ethereal quality hers had possessed. How do you feel? Alive. Wonderfully, terrifyingly alive. She spun around, her dress, now real fabric instead of ghostly memory, swirling around her legs. I had forgotten what it felt like to have a body, to feel the floor beneath my feet, to smell the hay and wood and… She stopped, her joy fading as she looked at him. In the lamplight, he could see right through his own hand. To the barn wall beyond. Oh, Caleb, what have I done to you? You've given me a gift, he said, surprised by his own reaction. Being a ghost wasn't the terrifying experience he'd expected. Yes, He couldn't touch the physical world, but there was a strange freedom in it, a liberation from the constant needs and limitations of flesh. I can see why some spirits choose not to move on. Don't say that. Fear crept into Cordelia's voice. You have to want to return to life. The spell only works if you choose mortality over this existence. I do want to return, but not because being a ghost is unbearable, because I want to hold you. Cordelia's face softened, and she stepped closer to him. I wish you could touch me now, when I'm finally real again. We have 24 hours. Tell me about the world I'm seeing now. And what a world it was. As a ghost, Calum could perceive layers of reality invisible to the living. He saw the lingering impressions left by every person who had ever entered the barn, shadows of memory and emotion that painted the air in brilliant colors. He saw Daniel Webb's final moments, not as tragedy, but as a man's courageous attempt to save the woman he loved. He saw Bartholomew Vance's death 20 years later, alone and bitter, consumed by the hatred that had ultimately destroyed only himself. Most remarkably, he saw the threads of connection that bound living beings together, gossamer strands of light that linked every person to those they loved, those they'd lost, those they would yet meet. The thread connecting him to Cordelia blazed like fire, but he could also see fainter threads stretching back to Isabel and forward to possibilities he couldn't yet name. This is beautiful, he told Cordelia. I never knew the world had so much invisible beauty. You're not supposed to find it beautiful, she said, worry creeping into her voice. The others who attempted this, in the stories I heard from other trapped spirits, they were driven mad by seeing too much, by the isolation from physical existence. Maybe they didn't have the right reason to endure it. Cordelia spent the first few hours of her returned life rediscovering physical sensation. She ran her hands through her hair, pressed her palms against the rough barn walls, even pricked her finger with a splinter just to feel pain again. But as dawn approached, her joy began to give way to anxiety. What if this is all we get? She asked. What if when the 24 hours are up, the spell fails and we're both trapped? Then we'll face it together. But you'll hate me eventually. You'll resent giving up your life for someone who couldn't even guarantee you a future. Calum wished he could touch her, could offer physical comfort. Instead, he had to rely on words alone. Cordelia, do you remember what you felt like after Isabel died? She nodded. The worst part wasn't the grief. It was the emptiness. The sense that nothing I did mattered because the person who gave my life meaning was gone. These past weeks with you, even separated by death itself, have been more meaningful than the entire year I spent trying to forget her. But what if— Stop. The command in his ghostly voice made her fall silent. You've spent 47 years trapped by what if. What if Daniel hadn't died? What if you'd been a better woman? What if you'd made different choices? But life isn't about what if, Cordelia. It's about what is. And what is? What is that I love you. What is that you love me. What is that we have a chance to build something beautiful together, and I'd rather risk everything for that chance than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. As the sun climbed higher, Calum began to understand why the ghostly existence had driven other men mad. It wasn't the isolation from physical sensation that was unbearable. It was the way time moved differently, the way hours felt like minutes and minutes like hours. He watched Cordelia eat a simple breakfast with the wonder of someone tasting food for the first time, and each bite seemed to take an eternity. But he also began to understand something else, the nature of the curse itself. The spell isn't really about exchanging life and death, he told Cordelia, as the afternoon sun slanted through the barn windows. It's about trust. You had to trust me enough to become vulnerable again, to risk becoming human with all the pain that entails. And I had to trust you and myself enough to believe our love could survive this test. And do you? Still believe it, I mean? Kylam looked at her, truly looked. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way she kept touching things as if to reassure herself of their solidity. He saw the doubt that gnawed at her, 47 years of conditioning telling her she didn't deserve this second chance. He saw the woman who had survived decades of isolation without losing her capacity for love. "I believe it more now than I did 24 hours ago," he said. As the sun began to set and midnight approached once again, they sat together in the barn, she on a hay bale, he floating nearby in his ghostly state. Cordelia had grown quieter as the day progressed, and Kylam realized she was terrifying herself with possibilities. "What if I turn back into a ghost and you become human, but we're still separated?" she asked. "What if we both become human and live happily ever after? What if the spell goes wrong and we both die? What if it goes right and we both live?" "Stop it," she said, but she was smiling despite herself. "Cordelia, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, this day has been worth it. Getting to see you alive, getting to watch you discover joy again, I wouldn't trade this for anything. Even if we lose each other, we won't lose each other. Whatever happens to our bodies, whatever realm we end up in, we'll be together. I know that now." The church bell began to toll midnight, and Cordelia stood up, the ancient parchment trembling in her hands. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I've been ready since the moment I met you." She began to read the counterspell, her voice steady despite her fear. The air in the barn began to shimmer again, and Kylam felt that strange pulling sensation returning, but stronger now, as if the universe itself was reaching for him. The last thing he saw before everything went white was Cordelia's face. No longer afraid, but filled with a fierce, blazing love that could have powered the sun itself. Kylam woke to the sound of his own heartbeat. The sensation was so startling after 24 hours without one that he gasped, his hand flying to his chest to feel the strong, steady rhythm beneath his ribs. Solid ribs, real skin, a heart that pumped actual blood through actual veins. He was alive. He was human. He was... "Kylam?" He turned toward the voice and saw Cordelia sitting beside him, gloriously solid and real. Sunlight streamed through the barn windows, painting golden highlights in her auburn hair. She was watching him with an expression of wonder mixed with disbelief, as if she couldn't quite accept that the spell had worked. "We're both alive," she whispered, reaching out to touch his face. Her fingers were warm against his skin, real and solid and perfect. "We're both human." Kylam caught her hand and pressed it more firmly against his cheek, marveling at the simple miracle of touch. "How long have you been awake?" "Hours. I was afraid to move, afraid that if I disturbed you, the spell might reverse itself." She laughed, a sound like silver bells. "I've been sitting here watching you breathe, counting your heartbeats, making sure you were really alive." He sat up, his body protesting the movement with very human aches and pains that felt wonderful, after the weightless existence of the previous day. "And the curse?" "Broken." Cordelia's smile was radiant. "I can feel it. The weight that's been pressing on my soul for 47 years is gone. We're free, Kylam. We're really free." He pulled her into his arms, and the sensation of holding her solid, warm body against his was so overwhelming he nearly wept. For weeks they had yearned to touch, to connect physically, and now she was here, real and alive, and his. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." They held each other in the dusty barn as the morning sun climbed.
Higher, neither willing to let go, both still half afraid this might all be an elaborate dream. But gradually, the sounds of the waking world intruded: birdsong, distant voices, the whistle of the morning train reminding them that life waited. Beyond the walls of their private miracle, "What happens now?" Cordelia asked, I've been dead for 47 years. I don't exist in your world, no papers, no family, no history. How can we build a life together? The same way people always do, Selim said. One day at a time, we'll figure it out as we go. But the people of Millbrook Creek, they'll ask questions. Where did I come from? Who am I? You're Cordelia Ashworth, he said, surprising them both. My wife, who's been living with relatives. Back east while I established myself here. You've just arrived on the morning train to join your husband. Cordelia Ashworth, she repeated, testing the name. I like the sound of that. Then it's settled. We'll get married properly as soon as the preacher can arrange it. But as far as anyone needs to know, we've been husband and wife for months. Cordelia pulled back to look at him seriously. Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we leave this barn, once we start a life together, there's no going back. You'll be bound to a woman who's lived through things no living person should know, who's seen the other side of death itself. And you'll be bound to a man who's made his share of mistakes, who failed his first wife in ways that still haunt him, who bought a barn for 50 cents because he was running away from his own grief. We're quite a pair, aren't we? She said, her eyes sparkling with humor. We're perfect for each other. That afternoon, they walked into Millbrook Creek together, Cordelia wearing a dress they'd found in an old trunk in the barn clothing left behind by some long-ago rancher's daughter. That fit her as if it had been made for her. Selim introduced her to the townspeople as his wife, arriving from Denver to join him in their new life. If anyone thought it odd that Cordelia seemed unfamiliar with certain aspects of modern life, electric lights, the newer styles of dress, recent historical events, they attributed it to her sheltered upbringing back east. She was so charming, so genuinely interested in everyone she met, that the community welcomed her with open arms. Within a month, they had become one of Millbrook Creek's most beloved couples. Cordelia's mysterious past only added to her allure, and her genuine kindness quickly earned her a place in the hearts of the townspeople. She started teaching music to the local children, her voice carrying an ethereal quality that made grown men weep during church services. Selim found that loving Cordelia didn't diminish his love for Isabel. Instead, it transformed it. The grief that had consumed him became a gentle sadness, a sweet memory of what had been rather than a crushing weight of what was lost. He carried both women in his heart, each love distinct and precious. As winter gave way to spring, they turned the old barn into their home. Selim reinforced the structure and added modern conveniences, while Cordelia created a garden that seemed to bloom with supernatural abundance. Visitors often commented on the extraordinary beauty of the place. The way flowers grew larger and more vibrant there than anywhere else in the territory. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Cordelia turned to her husband with a secret smile. I have something to tell you, she said. Oh, what's that? She took his hand and pressed it to her still flat belly. It seems that becoming fully human again has restored everything. Selim's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Are you saying we're going to have a baby? The joy that flooded through him was so intense it took his breath away. A child there. Child, born of a love that had literally conquered death itself. He swept Cordelia into his arms, spinning her on until she laughed and begged him to stop. When? He asked when he finally set her down. Late autumn, I think. Our love child will be born as the first snows fall. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind sing through the eaves of their transformed barn, Selim reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. He'd come to Millbrook Creek running from love and loss, convinced he didn't deserve happiness. Instead, he'd found a woman who taught him that love didn't require perfection, only courage. Do you ever regret it? Cordelia asked, her voice drowsy with contentment. Giving up your old life for this? "This is my life," he said, pulling her closer. Everything before was just waiting. Their son was born on the first day of November, during a snowstorm that blanketed the valley in pristine white. He had his mother's gray eyes and his father's stubborn chin, and when he cried, the sound was so purely alive that both parents wept with joy. They named him Daniel, after the man whose love had set Cordelia on the path to freedom and raised him with stories of courage and second chances, of love that transcends death itself. Years later, when Daniel was old enough to understand, they would tell him about the barn and the ghost and the 50-cent miracle that brought his parents together. He would grow up knowing that love, real love, was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any leap of faith. But that was still in the future. For now, Selim and Cordelia simply held their son and marveled at the impossible perfection of their life together. A life that began with a ghost in a barn and bloomed into something more beautiful than either had ever dared to dream. Outside. Snow continued to fall on the old barn that had once been a prison and was now a home, covering the past in pristine white and promising that every ending could become a new beginning, if you were brave enough to believe in love.